I'll be reading from the April 30th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Thank you for joining us today. The highlights under Business and Finance are: the Fed's Powell said he would stay on the central bank's board after his chairmanship ends to defend the institution from what he called unprecedented legal attacks from the Trump administration. Major U.S. stock indexes ended mixed after the Fed left interest rates unchanged, with the Dow and S&P 500 losing 0.6% and less than 0.1% respectively, and the Nasdaq rising less than 0.1%. Elon Musk said in court testimony he was a fool to back OpenAI when it was a nonprofit and clashed with attorney for Sam Altman. Meta Platforms reported a 33% jump in quarterly sales compared with a year earlier and said it would spend more to build AI data centers this year than it had forecast. Google parent Alphabet reported a 22% surge in first quarter revenue as the artificial intelligence race fuels growth of its cloud business. Microsoft reported robust cloud growth of 40% that failed to allay investor concerns about how it will convert its bet on AI infrastructure into reliable profits. SoftBank is forming a new venture focused on the intersection of AI and robotics, an area CEO Masayoshi Son sees as the next frontier for the Japanese conglomerate. Shares of Bill Ackman's stock-picking fund fell more than 18% in their trading debut on the NYSE. Robinhood shares fell more than 13% after the brokerage's quarterly earnings report signaled that its customers may be turning more cautious. Now for the key articles under the Worldwide section. The Supreme Court sharply restricted states from using race to draw voting districts that help minority communities elect their preferred candidates. Florida's Republican-controlled legislature approved a redrawn district map that could give the GOP up to 4 more seats in the House in the midterm elections. The Supreme Court appeared closely split on the administration's bid to end legal cover for hundreds of thousands of immigrants who now enjoy temporary protected status. Prosecutors released new details about the suspect in the shooting at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, saying he planned the attack weeks in advance. The White House opposed a plan from Anthropic to expand access to its powerful Mythos artificial intelligence model, citing national security risks. U.S. military operations in Iran have so far cost taxpayers roughly $25 billion, a top Defense Department official told lawmakers. Amazon is discussing a potential reboot of The Apprentice, the reality TV show that once starred Donald Trump and propelled him to national fame. 2 California initiatives addressing a proposed wealth tax and underwritten in part by Google co-founder Sergey Brin are on track to qualify for the November ballot, backers say. 2 Jewish men were wounded by a knife-wielding attacker in a largely Jewish neighborhood in London, the latest in a string of anti-Semitic acts in Britain. The U.S. charged the governor of Mexico's Sinaloa state and other officials with drug trafficking. Administration officials offered an unusual glimpse into national security planning as part of their bid to save the construction of Trump's planned ballroom. The picture on today's front page shows Jerome Powell exiting the stage with the American flags in the background. And the caption reads, Jerome Powell on Wednesday exits his last news conference as Federal Reserve Chair. The article, Powell plans to remain on Fed board. Longtime chair vows to defend central bank's independence. Rates stay unchanged. By Nick Timiraeus, Washington. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell said he would stay on the central bank's board after his chairmanship ends next month to defend the institution from what he called unprecedented legal attacks from the Trump administration. His decision marks a departure from decades of precedent and overshadowed deepening divisions over the path for interest rates. Powell made public his decision on Wednesday after officials extended an interest rate pause, but split over whether to continue hinting at further rate cuts, an uncharacteristically contentious end to Powell's 8-year chairmanship. His term as chair ends May 15th, but a separate term as governor allows Powell to remain at the Fed until early 2028. For decades, Fed chairs have left the building when their successor is installed. His decision highlighted how an unprecedented public campaign to pressure the Fed to lower interest rates has further complicated the handoff to Kevin Warsh, the former Fed governor President Trump tapped as Powell's successor. My concern is really about the series of legal attacks on the Fed, which threatened our ability to conduct monetary policy without considering political factors, he said. I'm worried that these attacks are battering the institution. Justice Department officials suspended a criminal probe of Powell's oversight of the Fed's building renovations last week after a court blocked subpoenas issued to the central bank in March and after the Senate threatened to delay indefinitely Warsh's confirmation. Powell said the legal fight that left him no choice but to stay until the threats were fully and transparently resolved. He said he intended to keep a low profile as a governor and had no desire to interfere with Warsh's leadership. Court curbs use of race in redistricting by James Rameser and Louise Rofnowski, Washington. The Supreme Court on Wednesday sharply restricted states from using race to draw voting districts that help minority communities elect their preferred candidates. The 6-3 decision, which divided the court along ideological lines, further erodes the traditional protections of the Voting Rights Act and is expected to fuel additional state efforts to remake their congressional maps, potentially eliminating safe Democratic congressional seats and converting them into districts that lean Republican. The ruling could also lead to fewer minorities in Congress. Justice Samuel Alito, writing for the court's conservative majority, adopted a narrow interpretation of the central provision of the Voting Rights Act, the landmark 1965 law that prohibits racially discriminatory election rules. Alito said the provision, known as Section 2, applies only to state redistricting practices that intentionally discriminate against voters on the basis of race. It doesn't prevent states from pursuing a partisan advantage in ways that might also reduce the voting power of large and geographically compact minority communities, he wrote. Alito, echoing a previous ruling by the court, said the nation, particularly the South, had seen vast social change since the days of entrenched racial discrimination that prompted enactment of the Voting Rights Act. Black voters now participate in elections at similar rates as the rest of the electorate, even turning out at higher rates than white voters in 2 of the 5 most recent presidential elections nationwide and in Louisiana, he wrote. The case involved the congressional map in Louisiana, which has 6 seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. The state, prodded by rulings from federal courts, drew 2 of those 6 districts to have a majority of black voters. Civil rights activists said the majority black districts were necessary for the state to meet the requirements of the Voting Rights Act. The High Court's ruling sided with a group of self-described non-African American voters who sued to challenge the state's map as an unconstitutional racial gerrymander. They argued that considering race in drawing district lines, even if done to comply with traditional voting rights requirements, violated the 14th Amendment's prohibition on race-based discrimination. The decision will likely call into question the continued viability of dozens of majority black, majority Hispanic, and majority Asian voting districts that states have routinely drawn as a way of obeying a broader, long-standing interpretation of the Voting Rights Act. Under prior precedent, states couldn't draw voting maps that weakened minorities' voting strength, which in practice meant protecting the ability of minority communities to elect their preferred representatives. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Meta posts 33% jump in revenue, pours more into AI. AI in the future is seen as doing most of the work company staff does now. By Megan Brabowski. Meta Platforms reported revenue increased 33% in the first quarter, its biggest quarterly revenue jump in nearly 5 years, but said it would spend even more money to build out AI data centers this year than it had previously forecast. The Facebook parent said Wednesday it brought in $56.3 billion in sales and net income of $26.8 billion. Both sales and net income came in ahead of analyst expectations, although $8 billion of net income was the result of a tax benefit the company realized in the first quarter of the year. Meta stock was down more than 5% in after-hours trading. A spate of big tech earnings reports on Wednesday captured how artificial intelligence is transforming the industry's economics, driving rapid revenue and profit growth, but consuming spiraling quantities of capital. Google parent Alphabet, Microsoft, and Amazon all reported revenue and profit that beat analyst expectations. Unlike Meta, all three are direct beneficiaries of mounting AI spending via their cloud computing divisions. Revenue at Google's cloud unit jumped 63% year over year. Microsoft's gained 40%, and Amazon Web Services saw a 28% increase. The UAE seeks a new Mid-East withdrawal from OPEC and alliance with Israel reshape strategic balance by Somerset, Jared Malzahn, and Dov Lieber. The United Arab Emirates' decision to withdraw from OPEC did more than deliver a shock to the cartel that has long ruled the global oil market. It also rang the opening bell for the new geopolitical order that the war with Iran is ushering in across the Middle East. The new alignment is redrawing political fault lines between the Arab world and Israel that defined the region for decades. Instead, Israel is forging an alliance with the UAE, the financial nerve center of the Gulf, and a potent military power, as both states work to change the region's strategic balance through force, if necessary. The two countries established diplomatic ties under the Abraham Accords in 2020, and their security cooperation has grown. Israel recently sent its Iron Dome missile defense technology and troops to operate it to the Gulf state. People familiar with the matter said something that would be unthinkable elsewhere in the Arab world. The war has given the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, a small and fantastically wealthy federation of monarchies, an opportunity to emerge from the shadow of its larger neighbor, Saudi Arabia, and assert its aspirations for regional power. The UAE pointedly signaled its new priorities by announcing its exit from the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, the one body the Arab world has ever been able to use to throw around its collective clout. At the exact moment Gulf leaders were meeting in Saudi Arabia in an attempted show of unity. The decision was timed to deliver a shock and to make a statement that the UAE's national interest comes first, Emirati officials familiar with the decision said. U.S. eyes alliance to resume Hormuz traffic, by Robbie Gramer and Alexander Ward. Washington. Just weeks after President Trump declared the Strait of Hormuz completely open and ready for business, only to see ship traffic stall, The administration is now asking other countries to join a new international coalition that would enable ships to navigate the waterway. The effort, called the Maritime Freedom Construct, was spelled out in an internal State Department cable sent to U.S. embassies on Tuesday that called on U.S. diplomats to press foreign governments into signing up. The U.S.-led coalition would share information, coordinate diplomatically, and enforce sanctions, according to the cable. It is the latest example of the Trump administration trying to restart the flow of commercial traffic through the strait, despite Iran's efforts to lay mines and attack tankers that transit the choke point without Tehran's approval. The strait's future has become a key sticking point in stalled peace talks between the U.S. and Iran, leaving the vital choke point in limbo as anxiety climbs over spiking global energy prices. While Iran is targeting vessels that don't pay transit fees to leave the strait, the U.S. Navy has imposed a sweeping blockade on all ships going to or coming from Iranian ports. The Trump administration's request for support shows the U.S. wants other nations involved in the current and potentially future management of the Strait of Hormuz. Your participation will strengthen our collective ability to restore freedom of navigation and protect the global economy. The cable reads, collective action is essential to demonstrate unified resolve and impose meaningful cost on Iranian obstruction of transit through the strait. A migrant issue divides the court. TPS, temporary protected status, debate focuses on judges' ability to review executive orders on protections, by Lydia Wheeler and James Rameser, Washington. The Supreme Court on Wednesday appeared closely divided on the Trump administration's bid to end legal protections for hundreds of thousands of immigrants who have been allowed to stay in the U.S. for humanitarian reasons. During almost 2 hours of oral arguments, several members of the court's conservative wing suggested that courts have little power to review the executive branch's decisions about a program known as temporary protected status. But Chief Justice John Roberts seemed more skeptical of the government's claims. And Justice Amy Coney Barrett signaled concern that the administration didn't follow the proper steps, making her a potentially pivotal vote in the case. Under the program, which Congress created in 1990, qualifying immigrants are permitted to temporarily remain in the U.S. and work legally if their home countries are experiencing armed conflicts, natural disasters, or epidemics. The Trump administration argues decisions about TPS are, by law, entrusted to the Department of Homeland Security and can't be second-guessed by courts. Justice Neil Gorsuch was skeptical that if the Secretary's final determinations aren't subject to review under federal law, courts have the authority to effectively force the administration to postpone such a determination. How is that not judicial review of the Secretary's determination? He asked. All told, about 1.3 million immigrants were legally living in the U.S. under the TPS program when President Trump returned to office in 2025. Some of those immigrants might be entitled to other forms of immigration protection, such as asylum, but those alternatives are often narrower than the TPS program. So the elimination of TPS would make many of its beneficiaries subject to imminent deportation. Opponents of the program say that prior administrations have misused it by repeatedly renewing benefits that are supposed to be temporary. In moving to end TPS protections for most of the countries in the program, DHS said it had determined that conditions in the countries are improving. The State Department says, however, many of the countries at issue are too unsafe for Americans to visit. The suspect's timeline comes into focus. Prosecutors detail weeks of planning for D.C. dinner attack. Hearing is Thursday. By Mariah Timms. Prosecutors released new details about the suspected gunman in the shooting at the White House Correspondents Association dinner, saying in court filings that he planned the shooting for weeks in advance. Cole Allen, 31 years old, of Torrance, California, has been charged with attempting to assassinate President Trump and 2 firearms offenses. Officials said he ran past a security perimeter and fired a weapon inside the Washington Hilton, the site of the dinner that Trump and administration members attended last weekend. One Secret Service officer was shot in the chest during the shooting. Officials said Monday they were still determining who shot the officer. In a request to the federal court overseeing the case, the Justice Department on Wednesday filed a 20-page motion to keep Allen in custody indefinitely. Allen is expected to appear in court Thursday for a hearing on his continued detention. He is being represented by a federal public defender. The filing details weeks of planning by Allen and includes new details on the timeline of the shooting. The court filing includes a selfie that prosecutors said Allen took in his hotel room shortly before the shooting, wearing a black dress shirt, black slacks, and a red necktie tucked into his belt, a black strapped watch, and what appeared to be wireless earbuds. Allen posed in front of his hotel room mirror with a half smile on his face. Also visible in the photo are a leather bag prosecutors said held ammunition, a shoulder holster, the handle of a sheathed knife, and tools in a holster later identified as pliers and wire cutters. On April 6, Allen booked a 2-night stay at the Washington Hilton for the weekend of the dinner, prosecutors said. On April 21st, he took a ride share from his home to Union Station in Los Angeles, where used a one-way ticket to board an Amtrak train headed across the country. He made it to Chicago on April 23rd, where he boarded the next leg of the journey to Washington, D.C., they said. He arrived in Washington on the afternoon of April 24th, bought a 3-day Metro travel card, and headed to the hotel, prosecutors said. Diary entries pulled from his phone by prosecutors appear to show that Allen documented what he saw as he traveled by train across the U.S., noting distant wind turbines looming like snowy mountains across the hazy New Mexico desert, and the beauty of Pennsylvania forest. Phone records show research into the dinner and Trump's expected movements for weeks before the trip, according to prosecutors. Allen left his hotel room more than once on Saturday and repeatedly checked news and other websites showing the president's location, they said. As the suspect approached the security checkpoint at 8:30 p.m. Saturday, he threw off a long black coat that had concealed a 12-gauge pump-action shotgun as he moved through the hotel, according to the documents. The gunman sprinted through the metal detectors while holding the shotgun parallel to the ground. He reportedly fired one shot in the direction of the stairs down toward the ballroom. Secret Service officers opened fire, but the gunman wasn't hit, prosecutors said. He fell to the ground, was restrained by law enforcement, and placed under arrest. Prosecutors said he had a minor knee injury. When arrested, the gunman was carrying 2 firearms, ammunition, 2 knives, 4 daggers, sheaths, holsters, needle nose pliers, wire cutters, and a cell phone, prosecutors said. The firearms are described as a Mossberg 12-gauge pump-action shotgun and a Rock Island Armory 1911 .38 caliber pistol. The shotgun was seized with 1 spent cartridge in the barrel and 8 unfired cartridges in the magazine tube, prosecutors said. The gunman carried an additional 6 unfired cartridges attached with Velcro to the shotgun and an additional 10 unfired cartridges in a small leather bag, prosecutors said. The pistol was found loaded with 10 rounds of ammunition, and he carried 2 additional 9-round handgun magazines, they said. The firearms were legally purchased from separate dealers in California, prosecutors said. The pistol was bought in October 2023, the shotgun in August 2025, they said. More weapons and ammunition were found in his hotel room, prosecutors said. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, A Victory for Voting Rights. The Supreme Court restricts the misuse of race to gerrymander. To hear the critics tell it, the Supreme Court on Wednesday gutted the 1965 Voting Rights Act and made it harder for racial minorities to vote. It did no such thing. A 6-3 majority in Louisiana versus Callis took a large step toward ending the partisan abuse of race to carve up congressional districts in a way that violates the Constitution. The VRA still protects voting rights, and its Section 2 can still enforce that law against attempts to restrict black voting with poll taxes and other obstacles. The court struck down the distortion of the VRA to use race to draw congressional districts in ways that amount to proportional representation. It's a much needed ruling, even if the court's reasoning was more complicated than it needed to be. Section 2 guarantees that minorities have an equal opportunity to participate in the political process and to elect representatives of their choice. Congress's aim was to prevent minorities from being disenfranchised. Yet courts have wrongly interpreted the law as requiring states to draw majority minority districts to prevent vote dilution. The court's Jingles precedent, GINGLES, 1986, set out a four-part test to prove vote dilution, which partisans have been able to game. Partisans must show that a minority group is sufficiently large and geographically compact and politically cohesive. They must also demonstrate that the white majority votes sufficiently as a bloc to defeat the minority's preferred candidate, and that the political process based on the totality of circumstances is not equally open to minority voters. Partisans have increasingly filed lawsuits under Section 2 to force states to redraw maps with more majority-minority districts. That's what happened in Louisiana. Liberal groups sued the state after Republicans redrew the state congressional map following the 2020 census because it included only one majority-minority district. The plaintiffs claimed Section 2 required a second such district on the rationale that blacks make up 30% of Louisiana's voting age population. A federal judge agreed, which prompted Republicans to draw a 250-mile majority-minority district that snakes from the state's northwest to Baton Rouge. White voters then challenged the new map as a violation of the Equal Protection Clause. The court majority says the new map is an illegal use of race. Justice Samuel Alito's majority opinion gives a detailed history of Section 2 and a tour of the court's messy racial gerrymander jurisprudence. He stresses the general rule that the Constitution almost never permits the federal government or a state to discriminate on the basis of race, except to remedy specific instances of past discrimination. But as Justice Alito notes, much has changed since Jim Crow. The VRA stamped out discriminatory election practices. Black voters now participate in elections at similar rates as the rest of the electorate, even turning out at higher rates than white voters in 2 of the 5 most recent presidential elections nationwide and in Louisiana, he writes. Justice Alito seeks to salvage Jingles' 4-part test with what he calls an update that raises the burden for proving Section 2 dilution by requiring a strong inference that intentional discrimination occurred. The ruling bars states from considering race when drawing maps and requires plaintiffs bringing Section 2 to disentangle race from the state's race-neutral considerations, including politics. It will now be difficult to win a Section 2 lawsuit on redistricting without clear evidence of discriminatory intent. It would have been cleaner if the court had simply overturned Jingles as its original redistricting sin, but that might now have made it past Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who 3 years ago upheld a lower court order requiring an additional majority-minority district in Allen versus Milligan. It takes at least 5 votes to win, and Justice Alito's update on Jingles tiptoes around those two precedents to get those votes. That legal dance created an opening for Justice Elena Kagan to attack the court's new test in a scorching dissent, and she scores some rhetorical and legal points. But she's overwrought in saying Section 2 is now eviscerated. That's true only insofar as a challenge is really racial cover for partisan gerrymandering. The majority decision leaves open a crack for partisans to bring Section 2 claims, so the court will have to police lower courts. The ruling means some states will now redraw their maps to eliminate majority-minority districts that were drawn with racial intent. That might help Republicans this year, though it is too close to Election Day for some states. The Voting Rights Act was a landmark of American liberty that helped to break Jim Crow. But that storied purpose has been twisted over the years by both parties to justify the use of race to gerrymander. The justices are restoring the VRA's original purpose. Now from the opinion pages. To save the midterms, go on the offensive. A mix of contrast with the Democrats and new ideas can limit GOP losses. By Karl Rove. As Republicans face a tough election, they must remember the words of Zhang Yu, a commentator on the ancient Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu's The Art of War. Attack is the secret defense. If Republicans fight the midterm on the defensive, they'll suffer potentially sweeping defeats. The GOP must stay on offense to save as many seats as possible. That won't be easy. Republicans can start by warning that if Democrats retake the House, they'll try passing an impeachment resolution against President Trump on day one. Each Republican should ask if his Democratic opponent supports this. Republicans should maintain that impeachment is a stunt. 2/3 of the Senate won't vote to convict. Trying would be bad for the country and only further poison American politics. Pressing Democratic candidates about impeachment leaves them with a bad choice. They can alienate their party's hard left by opposing the move, or they can disappoint the growing number of Americans tired of bitter, nasty politics by supporting it. In either case, swing voters will see it as a distraction from what really matters. Republicans must stay on offensive on affordability also. Inflation is 3.3% today. That's still too high. Candidates must explain briefly how they're working to bring it down, then ask their Democratic opponent why he didn't speak out when President Biden's policies drove even higher inflation. It reached 8% before a new GOP Congress in 2023 pumped the brakes on Democratic spending and other inflationary policies. Energy prices are a big problem for Republicans, and there are limitations in how effectively they can be with gasoline at $4 a gallon. But Republicans have a hand to play. They should go after Democrats over their efforts, past and present, to constrain oil and gas production. The GOP's drill, baby drill approach has increased production, putting downward pressure on prices. Do Americans want to revive Democratic policies that constrain the supply of fuel, making it more expensive? Additionally, Republicans won't get reelected by simply pointing out what they've accomplished. Running on, "I've done a good job," rarely produces midterm magic. Republicans must contrast, a polite word for attack, whenever possible. Last year's tax cut is an obvious target. Republicans shouldn't only talk about what is in the package, they should aggressively hit Democrats for opposing the bill and ask them whether they will repeal the tax cut. Democratic candidates could say yes or ignore the challenge, shifting the argument to favorable turf for the GOP. Or they could say no, in which case the party's left wing becomes unglued. Republicans also can't dwell on the past. Successful campaigns are prospective more than retrospective. GOP candidates must have fresh ideas that will improve the lives of ordinary Americans. These don't need to be administration initiatives. Don't wait for the White House. In fact, a little independence is important. The ideas don't need to be sanctioned by the House Speaker or Senate Majority Leader either. Anyone who waits for leadership to tell him what to campaign on is wasting time and risking defeat. The best ideas will likely come from the work that lawmakers are doing in their communities. Others will come from groups inside the House and Senate caucuses, such as the House Republican Study Committee. Outside think tanks could generate even more ideas, providing allies to sing the policy's praises. Voters need to grasp why these proposals are important, but it matters even more that voters feel the candidate truly believes the policies are necessary. People can quickly determine whether a politician really cares about an issue. Republicans also can't forget to find someone on the left who opposes the idea and go after him. Perhaps Mayor Mandani or a member of the squad. It doesn't matter if the targets are far away from the Republican hopeful's district or state, as long as they're visible. Many midterm election variables can't be controlled, such as the president's approval rating, the economy's strength, and the opposing candidate's quality. What GOP hopefuls can influence is their own campaign's tone and substance. If Sun Tzus and their commentators are too ancient for Republicans, perhaps they'll heed George Washington. Offensive operations, he wrote, a Revolutionary War colleague in 1799, are the surest, if not the only, in some cases, means of defense. Battles are most often won on the attack. So are political campaigns. Time to go on offense, Republicans, the right way, on substance. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Reopening the strait is now job one in the Iran war. The regime has concluded that the ability to control the route is its ticket to survival and rejuvenation. By Ruel Mark Gurak and Ray Tayek. America's war with Iran has already transformed the Middle East. For years, the Islamic Republic's clerical regime bragged that it could strangle the Persian Gulf, but it refrained from doing so, fearful of U.S. retaliation. 2 enormously destructive bombing campaigns in 8 months altered Iran's calculations. Neither its nuclear weapons program nor its ballistic missiles deterred the U.S. and Israel. Today's battle for the Strait of Hormuz offers the Islamic Republic an opportunity to resuscitate its fortunes and humble the U.S. For Tehran, controlling the waterway surely now takes precedence over advancing its damaged atomic ambitions. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is the most consequential player in Iran's scrambled wartime politics. Javan, a newspaper that serves as a mouthpiece for the IRGC, recently published a scenario for economic rejuvenation. The world economy's critical dependence on this route makes this source of income absolutely unsanctionable and changes the structure of Iran's political economy from crude oil sales to sustainable transit income. Tolls have become an essential tool that Iran selectively imposes. Chinese ships may not have to pay, but Europeans and others surely will. As important, the regime learned that it can inflict severe economic pain on its enemies with missiles, drones, mines, and other established technologies. The Islamic Republic is unlikely to forfeit this leverage peacefully. Iran now acutely appreciates its neighbor's fragility. The Gulf Arab economies were built under the umbrella of American hegemony. Take that away, and the freedom of navigation that goes with it, and the Gulf states will ineluctably go begging to Tehran. Despite the Western weaponry in Saudi and Emirati hands, without U.S. intervention, the Iranians will win any tug of war with Sunni Arabs. Israeli aspirations for regional reorganization, ideally an expansion of the Abraham Accords, will likely fizzle unless Tehran loses control of the strait. The Trump administration, like its predecessors, has focused largely on the nuclear issue and only secondarily on Iran's missiles. Economic warfare, the blockade, and sanctions is supposed to give America leverage in nuclear talks. For Iran's ruling elite, the bomb is still the ideal way of ensuring the Islamic Republic's regional sway while protecting the homeland from American and Zionist raids. But the nuclear infrastructure is too battered and the regime too unsteady to sprint for the bomb. Tehran needs time, cash, and deterrence. Controlling the strait can yield all three. Building a nuke and manipulating the waterway are two sides of the same coin. The first probably can't happen without the second. America's primary objective then must be reopening the strait. Secretary of State Marco Rubio appears to understand Hormuz's importance, saying those are international waterways. They cannot normalize, nor can we tolerate them trying to normalize a system in which the Iranians decide who gets to use an international waterway and how much you have to pay them to use it. What Mr. Rubio may understand, but left unstated, is that this means that the U.S. is stuck in the Persian Gulf, guaranteeing safe passage as long as the Iranian regime lasts. It also means we are on the hook to protect, at a minimum, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates from missile and drone attacks against energy and water infrastructure, which may come if the blockade begins to eviscerate the Iranian regime, or Mr. Trump starts bombing Persia into darkness. No matter what happens, the price of oil will remain elevated, but not as high as if the strait isn't opened. It will take time for global commerce to regain its confidence in America's commitment to the waterway. There will probably be clashes between the U.S. Navy and Iranian armed forces. If the Islamic Republic can get its hands on advanced Russian or Chinese cruise missiles, maintaining freedom of navigation will become a bloody, gut-wrenching affair. Yet it's entirely possible that the theocracy will crack. All countries have an economic breaking point, severe economic hardship, much worse than what Iran experienced during the Iran-Iraq War, will soon slam the region. Another intersection may yet topple the mullahs and the IRGC. Authoritarian regimes always seem indomitable until they're not. But the Islamic Republic has demonstrated a resilience that should make us wary of quick fixes. The regime's resistance economy, designed to be insulated from pressure by other countries, is into its fourth decade. In addition, the revolutionary elite sees itself as the vanguard of the Almighty. Given the repeated insurrections, the Iranian people's obvious fondness for Western ways, and the conspiracy-addled conviction within the regime that America has fueled and guided internal uprisings, Iran's rulers and their foot soldiers see themselves as the last redoubt against unbelief. If the regime doesn't crack, we could be in a long struggle that will require commitment, patience, and discipline across the U.S. government. Mr. Garrick is a resident scholar at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Mr. Tayek is a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. The Pepper and Salt cartoon shows a dog talking to a cat. And the dog says, "Addicted? Not. I'm just a social chaser. I could quit squirrels anytime I wanted." You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the April 30th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful day and weekend. Hopefully the sun will come out.